So this morning we had views from the policy front, which is a critical one. I'm going to come from the other angle, the business angle. I'm working at the rock face of deploying AI in companies, and I'm going to share with you some of the challenge that companies are confronted with when they want to deploy AI, technical one, but also human one, as Jas was saying. So I'm going to share those challenges with you, basically. So first of all, Jas asked me to give a little bit of an intro of, what are we talking about when we talk about AI. AI is an old concept, started in, the 1920s, basically. And there's a very famous man, which is Marvin Minsky, who founded the AI lab at MIT, who gave a pretty broad definition of AI. Basically, when computers do things that requires high-level mental processes, such as perceptual learning, memory, and critical thinking. So it's pretty broad. You know this guy because he's been an advisor to Stanley Kubrick for the script of, 201 Space Odyssey, and he basically invented HAL, the scary computer who takes over the command system for the whole thing. And I think this has also contributed to create some fear about AI, which are critical to have in mind when wanting to deploy AI. Beyond that complex definition and beyond, a mathematical equation that Cedric could have shared this morning, today AI is about basically 4 types of usage. You've got everything related to robotics, basically, and you saw all those computerized systems which are becoming more and more autonomous. You've got everything related to computer vision, surveillance, diagnostic, medical diagnostic, everything related to computer vision, which is a very active field. Everything related to, natural language, so Siri, of course, on your iPhones, but all the bots which are created who can write email, answer email, all those systems with which you can interact when you speak. And a very, very active field is on decision support, basically using AI to take better, more effective decisions. What are the fields where we see most of AI coming? There are basically 4 fields. One field is around everything related to the relationship with customers. Another one is around all the industrial operations, which is, being fully transformed by AI. All the area of risk is being transformed also with, in industry like healthcare, finance, insurance is totally revolutionized by AI. And the whole area of supply chain is also being, completely changed. And I'll share a few examples. One of the keywords for the seminar is demystifying. And I think it's important to demystify a few things. AI, if you read the press and everything, seen from the business world, is like a party. You have big players making money. Everyone is talking about AI. Everyone is claiming they're doing AI. We run a survey with MIT, we as BCG Gamma, every year on, where do companies stand in AI for real. And we have surveyed for the last one, 2,700 executives around the world to know where they stand in their companies. Today, we consider that we have 20% of companies only who have deployed AI at scale, at least some portion, some AI solutions at scale, and who have built, credible teams of AI capabilities and who have reached critical mass. It is only 20%. 2 years ago, that number was 18%. Okay, so everyone sees AI like a tsunami. This is something which is coming, quite slowly into companies. Still, most executives think it's very important to move to AI. Why? Basically, the survey is giving interesting numbers. If you look at those AI leaders, those 20% of companies who are very advanced in deploying AI, 80% of them make real money with AI. The rest of the sample, on average, is not making any money, and AI is a cost. 70% of the executives in those, leading company for AI, they consider that they learn, how to use AI better and better, and they know better than last year how to make money with AI. This is less than 25% for the rest of the sample. Lastly, 80% of those leaders in AI, they're going to increase their investment into AI in the coming year, whereas for the rest of the sample, on average, companies question whether they should continue to spend that much money on AI. In a nutshell, those leaders will be very difficult to catch up with. They make more money, they invest more, they understand better and better how it works. And things are getting serious because, 3 years ago, when interviewing executives in company, most of them would see AI as an opportunity, not a risk. Now, the jury is out. 50-50, more or less, are considering AI is primarily a risk or primarily an opportunity. Je suis désolé, je parle anglais parce que Yas parlait anglais. Should I speak English or French? English? Okay. So, you'll have English with French accents. So, no, but English is fine. So, so those companies will be extremely difficult to catch up with. All 84% of executives are convinced that AI is going to transform the product they serve, the service they deliver, and the way they're organized, but still only 20% of companies are really there today. Why? I think the big thing is stopping to pretend. Most companies, whatever they claim, are in this situation. They have hired some data scientists, super expensive. They have a small team at the center with big challenge, to get anchored and embedded into real world and operations. And, they're a bit like in their fishbowl at the center. You have lots of super cool prototypes which are being developed, but which are never scaled and they never hit the road. And in the end, many companies or institutions look like that. Tons of, AI initiatives, small thing, one data scientist here, a small startup we're working there, many things because people are excited about AI, but in the end, nothing material and nothing serious. And to get to material results, and the reason for that is lies. Okay, and everyone is lying about AI. The tech vendors are lying. You're going to make money, it's going to be fast. The consultants are lying. You should use that technology, you'll become rich. The data scientists themselves are lying, because they pretend things work when they only half work. And today, if you're an executive in a serious, in a serious role in a company, you've got those small prototypes which are built by, those young kids or sold by some startup. Before you take that and you plug this into your, supply chain system, manufacturing system, pricing systems, or whatever, there's a bit of a, leap of faith you have to make, and that's also keeping things at a prototype and a small, and small scale things. To get out of this sort of, mosquitoes around the mammoth situation, there is one thing which is super important. It's what I call investing in the 70% or even over-investing in the 70%. Basically, to bring AI to life at scale in the real hands of users or citizens. 10% of the effort is around the algos. Everything, people talk about right now, algorithmics, deep learning, and all that. 20% of the work is just plain technology, collecting data, building interfaces so that this technology can be used by real people. 70%, the biggest part of the effort, is about people and process. And AI fails not because, the algo is wrong or too difficult or too slow. AI fails because it doesn't land well in the real world. And most companies, they see AI as a CIO topic. It's not a CIO topic. It's a business leader topic, or even it could be an HR director topic. What is key is to land things for real in the hand of users. And AI, and I'll share example, is not about automating 20% of what people do. AI is about fully changing exactly how the full working processes of the people, how the people and AI have to interact together. And that's long, costly, you need training, you need to rethink and rebuild full processes. And that's where most AI project fails. We've had the crash of the B737 lately. Those two crashes were not linked to the fact that, the command system was wrong. This was exactly a problem of, crews not being able to use the system because poorly designed, not enough training, whatever. But when deploying those tools, on planes, and you have to train thousands of crews, you see this is a daunting task. You have exactly the same task to do whenever you deploy AI somewhere. One example of that, which is illustrating a few nice examples, Starbucks. Starbucks, they used to have a marketing program, 30 segments in North America. Every week, one promotion sent to one segment. So if you're someone who goes to Starbucks 3 or 4 times a week, hot drinks only, the marketeers of Starbucks, they want you to purchase either more expensive drinks or they want you to take hard food. And they would send every week one promotion on, hard food or premium hot drink to that particular segment. They moved to a system which is fully automatized now, fully personalized, and they don't work with 30 segments anymore. They work with, close to 500,000 different proposals sent, every week to their base of loyal customers, 20 million in the US. This is delivering tons of value for Starbucks. If you look, it's more than $150 million in incremental profit for them. Not sending more promotion, but just finding the right promotion for the right person. What is the 70% here? Several things. First thing, it's a massive change, as you can imagine, for the Starbucks marketing team. My job was, to find a visual, to think through, will I give, 2 stars on the loyalty program, or should I give 50 cents as a rebate on the cookie, send the thing, wait 2 weeks, receive the result, and plot for my next promotion. Now, these people, they're in charge of a dynamic library of millions of different visuals, promotions, coupons, whatever you name it. It's a massive change in their job. They have not become AI specialists, but that's a massive change in their job. Another important thing is ethics. To show you the power of these models, you have cafes, Starbucks cafes on campus. With the data you gather on cafe consumption, you can know in February who will pass or not the next year at university and who will fail or pass. And not because coffee makes you smart and cookies makes you fat, but because you know who has passed and failed the year before, and you see patterns, and you can compare patterns. You take look-alike techniques, and you can anticipate who's gonna pass or fail. And you immediately see the limit, Is it okay? Can I do something with that information or not? And of course, you don't do anything with that information. The most powerful promotion you can make are promotions where you do that with a group of friends. So if I tell you, I'll give you 5 stars. If you purchase 1 grand latte this week, you're likely to be somewhat excited and you might try to get the promotion. If I send you and your 4 best friends, if the 5 of you, you buy 20 latte in the week, you'll receive 25 stars, you are much more likely to play the game and to take it. Okay? The gamification and the groupification is a very powerful lever. At Starbucks, I know who is hanging out with because I can see patterns of people coming one after the other at the same cashier every day, and I know who is friend with whom, with a very, very high degree of certainty. Can I use this or not to build my promotions? That's where they move to super explicit consent. Because to do that, if I do that without you knowing, you'll be pissed off, potentially. So in the consent system, rather than having a sort of consent system on the full screen of the phone and you have to say yes, because anyway, if you don't say yes, you cannot choose a service, which is the trick played by most companies because of GDPR and this type of things. Starbucks went to a super explicit system saying, okay, we have different levels of personalization. If you accept this is the benefits attached to the different level, this is what we do with your data. Now you pick and choose. And I think it's much more the future of consent than trying to create some fog and, to manipulate in a way everyone. But that's an example to show, it's not just about algos, it's much richer than that. Another quick example, UPS in the US, they developed a pricing system. So they have, millions of small customers, millions of super complex contracts. So they developed some AI to build an engine which is helping set prices better. Is the field force out of a job? No. This is not because you have a system which is helping you find the best price that you are out of a job. But where is the key for that project? Of course, algos are very important. Money is super important. But the big job is to train 3,000 salespeople, to accept to use with an algo, to find the right KPIs, to convince them that it's working, to measure, to show them that it's working, and through that they make more margin and more bonus at the end of the year. That part of the job is much longer and more expensive than developing the algo in the beginning. So the main message to company is always, pick a unicorn, meaning take a few real topics, big topics, make them big, because this is so costly to deploy from end to end, from 10% to the end of the 70%, that you have to choose a few battles. And today companies, most of them have started to invest in new digital platform, data lakes and all that. Many of them have started to build teams. Very few of them have taken one of two, big topics and brought them to scale and turned them into true unicorn for them. And in terms of topic, you have those unicorns in the personalization area, as I shared with Starbucks. You also have, marketing mix optimization, pricing, like I shared with UPS. You have a lot in operations, to optimize the manufacturing yield, to optimize the level of inventories. You have a lot around networks, how to optimize network. You have a lot on risk and a lot on, support function like finance, HR, and all these topics. One very important topic when we talk about the human side of things, data scientists are super hubristic, okay? And basically they feel, give us some data and we'll reinvent the whole theory and we could rebuild physics. Just if you would send us, all measurement data, we would rediscover, the whole of the physics behind the world, which I think is obviously wrong. And on Google, if you have, pictures and you want to identify rabbits, of course, you don't need lots of, expertise because everything has been tagged. You plug a neuronal network and, after a few minutes, hours, the neuronal network will be able to identify rabbits from elephants and all that. But Google has billions of labeled data. In real life, you need experts' input. One example in steel, and that's for one of the largest steel manufacturers in Europe. There's been some work on the supply chain to understand better, anticipate demand, allocate orders to factories, and manage inventories. And one of the key challenges in the steel industry is you have like 200,000-300,000 different grades of steel. You're on a line of manufacturing. You move from one grade to the other. It can take a few minutes to a few hours, and it's difficult to anticipate. There's been some work to model this thing and to, basically anticipate better how long it will take, and this is reducing a lot, waiting time, waste, inventories, and this is bringing tons of efficiency in the system. You have 32 factories in Europe, 200,000 or 300,000 different grades. Just using machine learning, you don't have enough data to be able to build any proper model, and you have to combine expertise from, the maintenance team and engineers from the maintenance team plus machine learning to get somewhere. And Cedric mentioned this morning something very important. If you lose the human expertise, you're not going to be able to do this thing. This is happening already right now. In the pharma business, we are quite active, and Annie Codon, my colleague, will talk about that a bit later today. But in the pharma business, typical example is you have clinical trials data, and you want to anticipate whatever. Let's say one real example, and on a neurodegenerative disease, was to anticipate adverse effect of a drug. You take the clinical trials data, you build a model, and you can identify 62% of the patients which have no chance of adverse effect to whom you can give the drug, I would say, safely, in a way. To get that vetted by the FDA in the US, you cannot use machine learning. You have to use, a model which is frozen, that you can have built through machine learning, but you need a static model. What has to be done is to check that model with doctors. And what you very often see is in the variables that drive the outcome and the result, some have medical logic, and some don't have medical logic. So in the neurodegenerative disease, for instance, the drug, the adverse effect is heart attack. And there was a liver enzyme that was driving, the likelihood of heart attack. And from a statistical standpoint, this made sense. There was a true signal. From a medical standpoint, that makes no sense. Safety and robustness, you take out that variable of the model. You also take out variables from that model where you have good biomarkers with strong signal, but where experts will tell you, yes, this is true in the lab, but in real life, some doctors and some physicists get it very wrong when they measure that particular biomarker, so this should be taken out of the model. So data scientists in healthcare, they can build statistically sound model, but they cannot build safe models, and the joint work is critical. In the end, you end up with a model which is less powerful from a statistical standpoint, and you can carve out only 45% of the patient population as at zero risk, but you have a model which is much safer. Another example is in fashion retail, where lots of work is done in fashion retail, and that's, and one team build, forecast engine. So you've got the new collection, you need to purchase some quantities of garment you think you're going to sell, and for a particular green shirt, XL, whatever, you need to buy a certain quantity. Merchandisers, they're trying to anticipate what this quantity will be. You take AI. It's very easy to do a model which is better than the merchandisers. And typically, you reduce forecast error by 25%. You've got merchandisers which are, whatever level of performance. AI, which is 25% less errors. Do you fire the merchandisers and just rely on AI? I don't think so. Then you train the merchandisers on how to use the model, and the model is suggesting some quantities to purchase, and the merchandisers can decide to go for it or to change it. When you do that, it's worse than the algo alone, because 75% of the time, whatever is corrected by the merchandisers is just wrong. Okay? So here you're in this situation, you've got this good algo. When you put the algo in the hands of the merchandisers, it's worse than when the algo is alone. Do you fire the merchandisers? No. It means the algo is not smart. It means the algo is not using any of the input and the knowledge of the merchandisers. And the merchandisers, they know fashion. They know the trends. So the full algo was rebuilt to make sure that the merchandisers could provide real input. For instance, they would give their top creative bets for next year. So I'm the merchandisers. I'm in charge of the little girl, like, 8 to 12 product universe. I give the algo my top creative bets, the things which are new, which I think are going to succeed on the market. You don't ask numbers because they're wrong. You ask the bets. For some products where you have lots of uncertainty as an algo, you also ask the help of the merchandisers to rank them and to understand, those I don't know too well, how they could be ranked. When you do that, two benefits. You double the impact of the algo, you reduce, errors by 50%, and you have something which is much safer because there's a pair of human eye which is also checking what AI is doing. So this notion of having algos and people work together is a critical notion to have some safety when we do AI. And that's where people are very important. So people are important, and today in AI, when we say people are important, we think we need the stars, the genius, the super expensive teams, and so on and so on. Of course, it's important for companies to recruit those people, but the biggest HR challenge is with the rest of the company. BCG Gamma, we've run a number of surveys. Within OECD countries, 80% of the workforce is expressing very big concerns about AI, about the impact of AI on companies. Of course, busting job is something they care about. Surveillance, ethics, dehumanization, the workspace. I've got 10 colleagues. Tomorrow I've got 1 colleague and 8 robot colleague. What will be the coffee break like? Maybe less fun, I don't know. So people are scared a bit with these things. 1/3 of the people, of the workforce in developed countries, they think in 5 years their job is gone. So they're out of a job. And another third, they think the job is still there, but because they don't understand new technology, they're gone. So when you come with AI, 2/3 of the people feel, okay, this is the end of my day. There are massive HR coaching challenges related to AI. And of course, those numbers are massively overstated, massively. And the survey we do with MIT shows that 10% of the initiatives launched by the companies leading the field in AI, 80% is about effectiveness, better decision making, not killing jobs, okay? And when we say, okay, it would be good if, for instance, doctors, they could have some tools to support diagnostic when they see scanners. The point is not to save the cost of the doctor. The point is to take better medical decision, better treatment, and that's where the big economic outcome is. When you do supply chain, the point is not to know whether you can replace 1 or 2 planners by AI. The point is to know whether you can manage your stock better to reduce, inventory, carbon footprint, money sunk into the inventories. That's where the outcome is. And there needs to be tons of education on that topic. We need to stop also mythifying, all jobs will be gone in 5 or 7 years, because this has created a very bad mindset, I think, around AI. And the reality is full automation is very difficult to achieve because AI does not understand context. All jobs will be, affected by AI, I think, in 3 ways. There will be some automation, but this will not be the largest part of partial automation or full automation of some job. Some job will be rationalized, meaning AI will take some part, but that part will be seen as the value add part. Think the Uber driver versus the London taxi cab driver. You don't need to be as skilled to be a Uber driver as a London cab driver, and that's why you don't have the same, training and and exams to get there. If you are in a factory, I'm a maintenance operator. My pride, my professional asset is I know that line and I know how to fix it. Tomorrow I will have some, VR glass telling me, oh, for the line, change this, do that, do these things. Part of the value-add job, can be done or can be partially automated by AI, but you still have humans in the loop doing the job. And this one is a challenge within companies because people feel, this is a bit the Uberization of my job. I'm losing a bit of the, value add that I have. So that's a true HR challenge in company. You can also see that as a way to bring in people with less qualification and less into education onto the job market. Okay, so depending whether you look from, the insiders or society as a whole, you might have different views on the impact. And many jobs, I think AI will provide, new venues. Some of the, I would say, very tedious and repetitive job can be automated, leaving more time, exactly like in the Starbucks example, for people to think. The new job of, the marketers in Starbucks is not to try to guess among 5 features which one is going to, bring the sales. This is now thinking much more about, okay, let's manage our segments. What do I want to change in the behavior of the different segments? Gaining in understanding in that field and becoming more and more sharp in terms of objective function that is set to the algos. So I think, yes, most jobs will be, affected, but those jobs will not all vanish. And the key of the success will be, at the interface of people and jobs. And why it's so important to keep humans in the loop, because AI is called intelligence, but it's dumb. It's just sets of rules which are applied very systematically. Okay, it's nothing else. Huh? And this can create problems if it's left totally out of human hands. And even if you take, some of the best, companies in the world with AI, you can have weird things. Dear Amazon, I bought a toilet seat. Because I needed one necessity, no desire, I do not collect them. I'm not a toilet seat addict. No matter how temptingly you email me, I'm not going to think, oh, go and then, just one more toilet seat, I'll treat myself, okay? So this is okay because no big deal. Then, had the same situation with my mother's burial urn, okay? 4 months after her death, I got messages from Amazon saying, if you like that, okay? But still, no big deal, okay? In the US, there's one office furniture distributor who has built an AI engine to do pricing in stores and on the net. Please, algo optimize short-term margin. What is the algo doing? Trying to learn by testing a bit what is the profile of high price sensitivity customer and low price sensitivity customer. And if you are low price sensitivity, high price, and if you are high price sensitivity, low price. The problem is the algo is good at picking who's going to accept to pay high and who's not going to accept to pay high. And in the end, where did this land? The stores in the poor neighborhoods started to skyrocket prices because no alternative, less educated customers, and same on the internet. And then you had a commercial policy which was basically let's reap the poor to subsidize the rich, okay? Kind of weird. And I don't think the commercial director, in his good sense, would have produced a memo stating this strategy. You let the algo optimize short-term margin, this is the type of thing that happens. You have a health insurer in Europe who is selling premium services for people who stay in hospital. And it's a good business because, hospitals tend to be roughly as comfortable as jails those days in Europe. So there's a good business opportunity in that field. So the health insurer, what did they do? They take all the records from their people, their customers, basically, and they know what are all the medical doctors they saw. So they know the sequence, they know how much they pay, and they know when that happened. They don't have the outcome and all the details on the visits. But still, from that, you can infer who is likely to enter hospital soon. And then the idea was to send mail to push those nice offers, have a TV set or whatever during your stay in hospital. They tested the offer on the phone first with their call center. And it happened that some of the prospects they were calling, the call center was pushing for their new offer for stay at hospital. And the patients or their customers did not yet know that they would have to go to hospital. So the news was not spat by the doctor, but by the call center. Okay? So data science is powerful, that we knew. But you need to anticipate these types of situations and these types of collateral damage, basically. And I'll have a last thing, because here I feel, and Cedric said it very well this morning, we are a lot about Europe. And when we talk about Europe and different countries, we see US as a big giant and we see China as another big giant, and we are very fast to talk about government spending, government budget, regulation. My God, when we did our first survey across countries to see who is using AI a lot, Germans were last of the pack. So of course German pride was a bit hit. So they decided they needed to dig into that to understand what makes a country successful or not for AI. And the proxy for a country for them was, let's look at the big companies and see who is having AI or not, and let's find the criteria. And basically, the findings of the survey, and they did that across the world, is three things. Companies which are advanced with AI, they tend to do 3 times less detailed impact surveys before they launch anything in AI. They work across organization silos, 3 times more than the other companies. And they have much faster innovation cycle. In a way, they are super agile, super pragmatic. And to be successful with AI is the opposite of our European engineering culture, where we can do, high-speed trains, rockets, nuclear plants, whatever. Pragmatism, testing, experimenting, and Cedric said experimentation is critical and one of the key words that he brought to the government as part of his report. This mindset needs to come. And one of the reasons why the US has leapfrogged is not just GDPR or Google is big and whatever, others are small. I think there's a mindset shift to do. AI is not a scientific field exactly like the others. There is less theory, it's more about practicing. And to move on that, I think there's a mindset shift that needs to come in Europe at all levels, in company regulators everywhere. Because if we don't experiment enough, and if we are too much into I need to know it from the start and to put the perfect framework on everything before I start, I think we're never going to progress. This is what I wanted to share with you this morning. Thank you.